Hello and welcome back to Something Z, and welcome to If Deku Was the Avatar Part 6. Last time on the What If, the villain raid happened, with Izuku and Bakugo being able to escape after some fighting, and shortly afterward the provisional license exams happened, with it just finishing. Okay, so now it's that out of the way, let's jump into the video in 3, 2, 1. So now it's a couple of minutes since where we last left off, and when Izuku was done changing, he went back to the arena. And when he got to the center, he saw a giant board next to the main examiner, who was on stage. And when everyone got to the center, the main examiner showed the names of the examinees that passed, with Izuku passing while Todoroki and Bakugo failed, because of their actions during the second part of the exams. Then all of the examinees that failed were told that even though they failed this time, they will be given another shot to take the exam again after taking an extra class. And shortly after the names were revealed, the people that passed went to go get their pictures taken. And a couple of hours later, Class 1A made it back to the dorms, and the fight between Bakugo and Izuku doesn't happen, since Izuku doesn't have one for all. So now we skip to when it's the first day of the school year, and on the first day, Class 1A goes to an opening ceremony, and there, Class 1A learns about the hero work studies. So now we skip a couple of days, and when class starts, 3 older students walk into Class 1A, and they try to explain the hero work studies. But after 3 tries, the yellow-haired student tells all of Class 1A to go to the gym, and whenever they try to ask him why, he just tells them that in order for them to truly understand, they will have to fight him. So now we skip to when Class 1A gets to Gym Gamma, and like the canon, Todoroki stood out since he failed, but Bakugo wanted to test the yellow-haired person's strengths, so he decided to fight. And when the fight began, the melee fighters ran at Mirio, with Izuku one of the first people to get to him, since he was using his bending to increase his speed, and Izuku went to punch Mirio in the gut, but before the hit landed, Mirio's clothes came off of him and he sank into the ground. And confused by what just happened, everyone stopped and they began to look around the room, and after less than a minute, Mirio popped out of the ground in front of Jiro, and before she could react, he hit her in the gut, knocking her to the ground. Then Mirio began to attack the long-range fighters, and he was able to knock them all out before the melee fighters were even able to get to him. Then Mirio began to attack the melee fighters, and eventually it's only Izuku and Bakugo. And wanting to test Mirio's abilities, Izuku made earth walls around the area, just so he could see how strong Mirio's quirk was, and Izuku fought Mirio using their bending, since if he used his other bendings, Mirio could actually see the attacks. But eventually Bakugo was knocked to the ground, and Mirio was able to punch him in the gut. Then Izuku put down the walls he made and he ran at Mirio as fast as he could, but before he landed the attack, Mirio phased through it and he went for a counterattack with a punch. And seeing this, Izuku gathered the rocks from the nearby ground and he used them to surround himself, making rock armor. But even seeing this, Mirio kept going, and when his fist hit Izuku's armor, it crumbled apart, and his fist went into Izuku's gut, and it flung him a couple of feet away. And when Izuku hit the ground, the match was over, since everyone from Class 1A was on the ground. Then after everyone got back up, Mirio gave a speech about how his quirk used to be useless, until he began to train like hell. So that's why he believes that the hero work studies are worth it. And shortly after the speech, Class 1A goes back to their classes while the big 3 go back to their dorms. And while they were walking to the dorms, Nejiora asked Mirio if anyone caught his eye during the fight, and in response he said that Izuku was interesting, and he could be useful to Sir. So now we skip a couple of weeks, and while Izuku was eating, he was called to the principal's office. And after Izuku got there, he was told that he got an offer from the pro hero Sir Night-Eye for the work studies. And hearing this, Izuku accepted the offer. So now we skip to that weekend, and when Mirio and Izuku got to the agency, they were told about the Shia Isekai, and the test doesn't happen since Sir actually gave Izuku an offer, after Mirio told him about Izuku. And after Sir told the 2 about the group, he sent them out for a patrol. And while they were on patrol, the 2 began to talk about things like their hero names and their quirks. And while they were discussing this, Izuku learned about how Mirio broke through his rock armor. It was because he actually had the second quirk, which was super strength. And after some time, the 2 began to walk across an alleyway. But before Izuku could cross the alley, he noticed rapid footsteps. So he stopped, and after a couple of seconds, he sees a little girl run from the alleyway. And she after a couple of seconds ran into Izuku, but since he was ready, he was able to grab her. And when he did this, the 2 began to look at the alleyway. And after a couple of seconds, someone began to walk out. And when they got out of the darkness, they were able to tell that it was Overhaul, the man Sir just told them about. And when Overhaul got closer, he told the little girl that she was disturbing the heroes, and that she should hurry back to him. And while he was talking, Izuku wasn't paying attention to him. He was mainly focusing on the girl, and how she had bandages covering both of her arms, and how she was visibly shaking. So seeing this as a good opportunity to get their target, Izuku was about to make a box around Overhaul, using the earth around him. But Mirio seeing Izuku start to move, he grabbed Izuku by his collar and he began to make him stand. And when he was standing, Mirio told Izuku that they should continue on with their patrol, but Izuku wouldn't move. He was too distracted on saving the girl. So eventually, Overhaul says that he will explain everything if they just follow him into the alleyway. And after that, he began to walk away. But before they could follow him, Mirio runs after him when she sees him start to take off his glove. And with the event being over, the 2 just continue on with their patrol. And when they got back to the agency, they tell Sir about what just happened. And when they were done explaining, Night-Eye got mad at Izuku since he could have ruined their whole operation if he actually went through with it. And he eventually says he can't do whatever he wants since he's not strong like All Might. And shortly after Night-Eye's done lecturing Izuku, Izuku went back to UA, so now we skip a couple of days. And when Izuku was ready, he was about to go to Sir's agency, but when he got to the dorm living room, he saw Sue, Ochako, and Kirishima, who were also called to go to their internships, so they decided to go together until they needed to split up. But eventually the group makes it to Sir's agency, and when they walk in, they see a group of pro heroes, with some of them being Fatgum, Ryuku, some old guy from the raid, and their teacher Aizawa. And when Sir believed that everyone was there, he told everyone to go to the meeting room, and when they all sat down, they began to talk about what they found about the Shiazaikai, and eventually they figure out that they have been using Eri's blood for the anti-quirk bullets. And when the meeting was done, the students were told to wait outside the meeting room so the pros can discuss classified information. And after a couple of minutes, Aizawa walked out of the room and he went to the students, and he told them that he wants them off the mission, since a league of villains could be involved. But since he knows that even if they told them no, they would still go, he told them to try their best, but to not be too reckless. So now we skip a couple of days, and those days are spent with Izuku practicing his bending. And by this point, Izuku's become more adept at using his water bending, so now he can do a couple of complicated techniques. And a couple of days later, Sir was able to find out the information they needed, so he called everyone back to his agency. And when they got there, they were told where Overhaul was keeping Eri. So now we skip to the next day, and when it was around 8:30 a.m., the raid began. And when it did, a police officer knocked on the front door and they shouted that they have a warrant. But right after they said this, a giant villain burst through the wall, and he flung some of the police. So Ryuku's agency went to fight the villain, while Sir Night-Eye's agency, Fatgum's agency, and some police officers ran deeper into the base. And when they got into the actual base, they got surrounded by more goons, which Bubble Girl and Centipede were able to distract, allowing the rest of the group to continue on deeper into the base. But after a bit of running down a hallway, the group comes across a wall, and when Mirio saw this, he ran up to the wall and he faced through it, and just like he saw it was there to block their path. So hearing this, Kirishima and Izuku went to the wall and they broke it down, with Izuku using his staff to do more powerful air blades, which helped slice up the wall, while Kirishima finished it up by punching at the cuts Izuku made. And after a couple of punches, a hole big enough for the group was made, so they then continued on. But after a couple of minutes, the hallway starts to twist and contort, and while this was happening, Mirio decided to go off on his own. So he began to face through the walls and he began to run deeper into the base. And before the group could follow after him, Mimic creates a hole under the group, and when the group was done following, they found themselves in a room with 3 villains, which Tamaki believes that he can handle on his own. And hearing this, Fatgum forces everyone else to leave the room, and even though they were hesitant, they listened to him, so they continued on. And after a couple of minutes, Mimic decides to attack Aizawa, so he launches a pillar at him that would have crushed him. But before the pillar actually hit him, Kirishima and Fatgum pushed Aizawa out of the way, and in exchange, they got hit instead, and they got flung into a different room, splitting them from the rest of the group. And seeing that they couldn't do anything, the main group continued on. And after a couple of minutes, the group comes across more of Mimic's twisting hallways, and this time, Rocklock uses his special move to make the wall stay in place. But when he did this, Mimic decided to split the group up, so he placed cement walls in the middle of the group. And when the walls were placed, Izuku was with Aizawa. And seeing this, Izuku began to swipe the air using his staff again, making air blades, to make cuts into the wall. And after a couple of minutes, Izuku was able to make deep enough cuts, so he ran at the wall and he kicked the wall while he cut. And when he did, there was now a giant hole. And when they walked into the next room, they see 2 Rocklocks, with one on top of the other one, with the one on top not injured and the other one has a stab wound. But luckily, Aizawa was able to see through this, so he used his quirk on Rocklock that was unharmed, which made him melt, revealing her true form, revealing it to be Toga. But even with the 2 of them, Toga was able to escape. But before she left, she was able to stab Aizawa in the shoulder, which was only deep enough to draw blood. And shortly after that, Izuku broke through the rest of the walls, allowing the group to come together. And after a couple of minutes, Mimic began to sink the ground around the group again. But when he did this, to the group's surprise, Toga and Choi seemed to be trying to rile up Mimic on purpose. And after a couple of minutes, Izuku was able to pinpoint where Mimic was, so he began to bend the stone ceiling, making openings where Izuku believed that Mimic was. And some of the holes revealed parts of Mimic. And with the holes, Aizawa was able to see Mimic and negate his quirk. So Mimic began to fall out of the ceiling. But right after he started to fall, Sir Night-Eye threw a high-density seal, which knocked him out. And Izuku raised the ground under Mimic, so he didn't have to fall too far. And when he landed, Izuku lowered the ground back. And when Mimic got to the same level as everyone else, they tied him up. And when that was done, Izuku, Aizawa, and Sir Night-Eye continued on, while the rest of the group stayed with Mimic. And after a couple of minutes, they got to another wall. And seeing this, Izuku just flew at it as fast as he could, making a hole big enough for the 3. And when they walk into the next room, they see Mirio fighting Overhaul, with him already fused with his henchmen. And on the ground, there was an anti-quirk bullet. And far away, there was Eri, who was hiding behind a spike wrapped in Mirio's cape. And seeing what was going on, Night-Eye told Izuku to help Mirio, while he and Eraser get Eri out of here. And hearing this, Izuku nodded and he ran to the 2 as fast as he could. And seeing the situation, Izuku began to move the ground under Overhaul, making him lose his balance. And seeing this, Mirio faced through the ground, and after seconds of him being submerged, Mirio flung himself back up at Overhaul and he punched him in the gut. Then he sank back into the ground. And this went on for a couple of minutes, and whenever Overhaul tried to touch the ground, to try to make spikes or move the ground, Izuku would counteract that by bending, and make it back to how it was originally. And after around 10 minutes, Mirio made Overhaul weakened. And seeing this, Izuku gathered the moisture in the air around them, and he gathered it into a ball, and when it was big enough, he fired it at Overhaul. And when it hit, Izuku changed the water into ice, freezing Overhaul in place. And Izuku froze it in a way so Overhaul's arms were out, so he couldn't use his quirk. Then Mirio hit Overhaul in the face until he got knocked out. Then Izuku ran back to the group he was with, and he told them that Overhaul has been defeated. And because Night Eye wasn't really in the fight, he was still alive. And the mission was considered not a failure since less damage had happened around the area, since it was all contained either on the streets or in the actual base. So now we skip a couple of hours, and all the people that were injured were taken to the hospital. And on the way to the police station, the same things happened, so Overhaul got his hands cut off, and Shigaraki now has some anti-quirk bullets. So now we skip around a week, and when it's time for class, Aizawa announced that they will have to decide what to do for the UA school festival. And after some time, they came up with an idea for what to do, which was a dance, with Jiro the one taking care of the music. And the next day, Izuku and Mirio went to the hospital to visit Eri, since Eri was still in the hospital because Overhaul was their only known relative, and they didn't trust her enough to put her in a normal orphanage, because she had such an unstable quirk. And when they got there, they asked how she was feeling, but it was obvious when they asked that she was still upset. So Izuku and Mirio then asked if they could bring Eri to the school festival, and they were given the okay as long as someone's there to watch her. And after they were given the okay, the two leave the hospital, and they go back to UA. So now we skip to the actual festival, and what Izuku was doing for the dance was he would be bending in the rafters above making special effects, and in this, Sato had to carry Aoyama around while the performance was going on. But the day before the festival, Izuku noticed that the rope was all messed up from all the practice, so he told the class that he would go get a new one the next morning. So now we skip to the next day, and Izuku just left the store with the rope, and when he was about to run back to the school, he bumps into an older gentleman and a young lady. He then apologizes, but before he could walk back to the school, he recognizes the face of the two as La Brava and Gentle Criminal, and knowing that they got found out, they then take off the disguises they were wearing, and they began to fly towards UA with the help of Gentle's quirk. And seeing this, Izuku drew in all the air he could, and when he was ready, he aimed it all towards the ground, which flung him into the air, and he angled himself so he was right behind the two. And before they could react, Izuku shot out an air blast at Gentle, which caught him off guard, which made the two crash into a construction site. And seeing this, Izuku shot out air to make him get there too. And when Izuku got to the site, Gentle was already back on his feet, and he was currently standing on a steel beam. And before Izuku could ask what he was doing, Gentle made the beam start to bounce around. And seeing this, Izuku shot out a wave of flames at the two. But seeing this, Gentle made a barrier, which made it so the fire didn't hit them. Then Gentle made a beam come out of its place, which made it start to fall. And when Izuku looked under it, he saw a civilian. And seeing this, Izuku ran to an edge of a nearby beam, and he began to bend the air around the falling beam to try to bring it closer to him to make it stop falling. But since it was so heavy and far away, it didn't work too well, so the beam just began to fall slower. So Izuku then shouted for the man to get out of the way. And hearing how serious Izuku was, the man ran away. And when the man was far away, Izuku stopped. So the beam then hit the ground at full speed, and it didn't hit anyone. And seeing that the problem was solved, Izuku turned back to where Gentle and La Brava were. But when he looks back, he sees that they are gone. And when he looks into the distance, he sees the two already near the school, since they flung themselves via an elastic crane, while Izuku was distracted. And seeing that the crane was still elastic, Izuku grabbed it, and he used it to fling himself with the help of some of his air blasts. And while Izuku was flying, he knows that the barriers that Gentle makes don't just disappear immediately. And when Izuku lands, Gentle and La Brava just landed as well, and they were just about to run to the school. And seeing that they were on the ground, Izuku made the nearby area around the two begin to move and shift, making the two lose their balance. And to counteract this, Gentle made the ground under him springy, so he can at least control his movements to some extent. Then Izuku stopped bending the ground while Gentle was in the air, and he shot out a gust of wind at Gentle. But expecting this, Gentle made a trampoline, which made the blast bounce back. But when it did, it hit another trampoline Gentle made, so the air bounced back, and it hit Gentle in the gut. And while Gentle was out of breath, Izuku raised the ground around the two, and he trapped them in rock boxes, with only their heads free. But while they were trapped, La Brava used her quirk on Gentle, giving him super strength. And with this new strength, he was able to get out of Izuku's box, and he destroyed the one La Brava was trapped in as well. Then the two began to fight, and while they were fighting, La Brava grabbed her laptop, and she began to run to the school. And while she was gone, Izuku tried his best to counteract Gentle's new strengths. But since now Gentle was stronger and faster, he was able to avoid most of Izuku's attacks. And eventually, Izuku got hit into a tree, which made him almost pass out the moment he made contact. But seeing that he was barely conscious, Gentle walked over to Izuku and he told him he was a strong opponent. He then kicked Izuku in the head, which knocked him out when he hit the ground. But the second Izuku closed his eyes, he opened them again. But this time, Izuku's eyes had a bright glow. Izuku then shot out a rock pillar under himself, which made him land back on his feet. And when Izuku was standing, he then began to create a tornado. And this time, he didn't hold back, so it was an F4 tornado. And being in the center of this, Gentle began to get pulled in random directions. And in the process, he began to hit things in the nearby area, such as trees. Meanwhile, Izuku was standing in the eye of the tornado. And after a couple of seconds, Izuku stopped. And while Gentle was falling and dizzy, Izuku gathered the moisture from all the water in the nearby plants and he fired it all at Gentle. But when it hit, Izuku made the water change forms, turning the water into ice, which made Gentle get stuck in a block of ice. And when he landed, Gentle was just about done. But seeing that he wasn't knocked out, Izuku gathered up all the air he could, and when he was ready, he shot out a wave of flames from his mouth, which hit Gentle head on, which gave him burns across his whole body, and the ice was now completely melted. And from all of this, Gentle was finally knocked out. And after a couple of seconds, the light in Izuku's eyes started to flash, until he was eventually gone. And when it was gone, Izuku was drained, but when he actually saw what happened, he went to check if Gentle was actually alive, which he was. And while he was over Gentle, La Brava ran over to Izuku and she began to punch him, telling him to let him go. And a couple of minutes later, Ectoplasm and Hound Dog show up, since while they were on patrol, they saw Izuku's tornado, and they knew they needed to get there quickly. And after a bit of time, Gentle and La Brava were taken away to get investigated. And remembering he left the rope, Izuku ran back to the store, and he ran back to the school with a couple of seconds to spare. And when the show began, Izuku started to dance. But when it was time, Ayama grabbed onto Izuku, and Izuku, using his airbending, flung the two of them into the rafters above. And when Ayama was ready, he jumped off and he began to fire lasers, lighting up the ceiling. And when it was time, they grabbed him up and Izuku began to bend fire around the ceiling, lighting it up as well. And when it was time for it to end, Izuku bended some nearby water and he turned them into water droplets around the top of the roof. And when they were in place, Ayama shot out a laser at the water, which made the ceiling light up with a rainbow. And by this point, Eri had smiled. And everything from here on out will be the same, with Endeavor trying to become the #1 hero. So I guess this is where I'm going to leave the What If. I hope you enjoyed it. It's been a lot of fun making this What If, so I hope to see you next time on Something Z.